Yes, it's been 2 years, a very busy 2 years without actually being able to say what we were working on. As we just mentioned then, it's been 10 days since we announced and launched the game as part of Apple's keynote last Monday. So we had to keep everything a massive secret for maybe 1 year and a half, which is really hard for us because I'm particularly really bad at keeping secrets without telling people things. So with me is Matt Newcombe, who's one of our senior programmers on Monument Valley 2, and Adrienne Law, who's the producer on the game. And yeah, unfortunately, we weren't able to call the talk Monument Valley 2 because everything was a secret. When we were trying to organize this, we were trying to think of a name that kind of suggested that there was something beyond Monument Valley 1 without being so explicit about it. So in the program, I think it's like, learn from Dan Gray and the people at Ustwo Games about what they've been doing since Monument Valley 1. And the answer to that is Monument Valley 2. So yeah, we'll just begin. So we started around 15 months ago on Monument Valley 2, and for those who aren't aware, we're now a 20-person game studio in South London. When I was here last time, 2 years ago, just after we made Monument Valley 1, we were only 8 people in size. So yeah, we've grown significantly over that period of time. We're part of a bigger studio called Ustwo, so we're Ustwo Games. And Ustwo themselves have studios in London and New York and Sydney. And Sweden as well. And they do a lot of UI, UX, and development work for big clients, sort of client kind of like facing stuff. So they create the applications you might use for a fashion label or a bank or something else. And we're a very, very small subsection of that, 20 people, and we focus just on games and just on interactive storytelling. I mean, games is kind of not a word we use very often anyway. We like to refer to them as interactive entertainment, because games suggests, lives, levels, time limits, that kind of thing. And Monument Valley 1 and 2 are, neither of those things. So we've grown a lot in that space of time, and it's just really, really nice to be able to come out and actually talk about things for once. This is actually the first talk we've done on Monument Valley 2 at all. As I said, it was only 10 days ago. We've all been traveling. I think we were in San Jose last Monday, and then San Francisco, and then back to London for our launch party, and then we went to New York, and then LA, and then we came here via Iceland yesterday. So if we look a little bit tired, I apologize. So the things we're going to look at today are, I'm going to talk a little bit about the beginning stages of Monument Valley 2, why we decided to make a sequel, how we found those initial stages. Then I'm going to talk about the characters we settled on, and then Matt's going to talk about how we come up with inspiration, kind of the visual reference of this, and then also how we tell stories through the medium of video games. And then Adrienne's going to talk user testing, user experience, and why that's so important to what we do. And then we're going to play through a demo level as well, and then hopefully, if we've got time, some questions. So for anyone who has sat down and has no idea what they've come into, we're just going to play the trailer really quickly. So it was really, really nice to hear those words on the way up about the types of things we've made with Monument Valley 1 and Monument Valley 2 being a kind of hybrid of video games and art and technology. That's why I've always been super keen to come and speak at Sonar, because, in comparison to where we were at last week, so we've been at E3 earlier this week as well, and it's very video games. It's very video games in the sense that's there, and we always feel really left out. So it's really nice to come here where it's about music, it's about fashion, design, technology, business, all these things merged into one. It's the perfect fit for us, which is why we really wanted to come and do the first talk and explanation here. So if we cut back to February of last year, that's when we first started working on Monument Valley 2. And the first question we always get is, why did you guys make a sequel? I was in interviews last year where I said, we're never going to make a sequel. And there's two main reasons for that. And one of them is that, as I said, we grew from 8 people to 20 people, and we hired some amazingly talented people. And they came to the table with all these kinds of ideas that the original team never even had. We thought we'd done all we could with that universe in terms of its mechanics and the interactions, whereas a lot of the people that joined us, like Matt and Adrienne actually both joined us after Monument Valley 1, part of the reason why they joined us is because we made Monument Valley. So there's a whole new bunch of things brought to the table in terms of mechanics. We probably, as I said, February of last year, and the core goals still maintain the same as Monument Valley 1. It still needs to be a game that can be so beautiful at any single point that you can print a screen from that and hang it on your wall as a piece of art. That's one of the core values of what Monument Valley and any games that come out of that actually are. So if you see these here, this is kind of like a broad spectrum of all the different things we have to do with Monument Valley 2. We hardly reuse anything. A lot of the art is bespoke per chapter. That's why it ends up being relatively short in comparison to other games, because it's a lot more handcrafted than what you would do usually. So just trying to surprise you at every turn. Trying to ensure that when you're on a bus or a train in the morning and you're on your way to work, you have something in your pocket that you can just pull out and you can escape to. It's like an explosion of color in comparison to everything else around you. So it's really something we wanted to continue with. So going on to the second reason why we decided to make a sequel, and that's us talking about storylines that we feel are kind of underrepresented within video games. I mentioned how E3 in LA earlier this week was very video games, and it's very kind of macho and AAA and guns and action-based stuff. And we always kind of feel left out. For us, it's more a case of saying, what stories and characters do we feel aren't being talked about right now? And talking amongst us earlier last year, the story we settled on was the story of a mother and a child. One that you hardly ever see. And mothers are hardly ever present in video games at all. And when they are, they're usually seen as something that's quite vulnerable, something to protect. And for us, we wanted to try and switch that on its head and say that the mother in our game, she isn't summarized just by the fact she's a mother. She's one of the original architects of this world. She builds these monuments. She builds the sacred geometry that powers everything you see. Even every single monument you saw on the screen before this one, she's had a hand in. So for us to try and express that for ourselves and the growing relationship between those two characters was really, really important. So some members of the team had children as well between Monument Valley 1 and Monument Valley 2, which kind of led to us taking things in this direction. This is Atlas underneath, who is David's son, who he had after Monument Valley. He's been around the studio a lot, kind of bossing his father around, telling him what looks good and what doesn't look good. David is the art director of Monument Valley 2. He's also Spanish. So yeah, this is Atlas in front of the art wall that we have, where we composite all these different levels and structures so that we can assess sort of the overall visual style of what we're making. And it's really been a core value of what we want to do is have a studio that feels like a family environment. We're all friends. We spend a lot of time together, and we're still small enough that we really get on with each other. So the family nature of that and that relationship between two characters is really important. And we went through hundreds of characters David drew to do this, just to try and give people the right feeling. And originally even, before we settled on the mother and child, and I said we were talking about underrepresented storylines, it was even things like, two lovers, or it was a teacher and a student, or we really wanted to try and use these two characters as mechanics and have these two personalities kind of play off each other. So it took us a long time to actually sort of settle on the characters that we had. I think my favorite one that we never used is there's one with a castle for a head, which I'm really sad we never made work. But I think when you've got something in such a small screen, the silhouette of the thing you make is super important. So people just weren't managing to read it. So yeah, we, from the beginning, we never quite liked the ones on the left. I think 2 years ago when I came here, actually, I think the slide that went down the best with everybody was a slide I did with Ida and the crow next to each other, and I was talking about the symmetry between those two characters. And this is what we ended up with for the mother and child in this game. So this is Ro, who's the mother. She wears this awesome hat that keeps the sacred geometry inside it, kind of similar to how Ida did in the first game. And it's interesting what we do with the animations between those two. So the child, for example, has a really kind of like joyful skip and walk between the mother. And we really encourage people to kind of not want to leave the character behind. So yeah, we're really happy with the mother and child as we created them. It's probably been the #1 question in the interviews we've done this week. And the feedback has been, we're really glad that you're telling stories that aren't present in video games in a way and using visual storytelling that other people aren't doing. So I'm really happy that we found our own little niche, and there's cool people like you guys who want to turn up and hear us talk about it. So yeah, passing on to Matt now, who's going to talk a little bit about the inspiration behind what we do.
Yeah, so for us, inspiration is really important because it's very easy within video games to be very insular and look at examples of games that already exist and play a lot of games, but it leads to kind of derivative ideas and leads to things that don't feel fresh or feel like refinements of other things. For us, especially because our game really isn't just for gamers, we want it to be for everybody. We want everybody to be able to touch it and play it and experience it and get those kind of emotions. And for that, we're very conscious to find inspiration outside of video games. And I think that's true for every medium, whether you're creating something in music or film or art. Finding inspiration from the world around you and the things around you really help bake those ideas. And we have our game developers come from all backgrounds and all kinds of walks of life and from all over the globe. And we really encourage bringing those unique experiences together to help us process those ideas and really formulate what we want to express within video games.
Yeah, I think it was like a third of our team or something had never made a video game before starting. Like Adrienne hadn't as well. You'd done lots of awesome stuff beforehand. And even our lead designer, he'd worked on our VR game we made last year called Land's End. But apart from that, he was lead designer on a really high-profile game, having not really done that much experience in video games. And that has its own value in terms of bringing other thoughts and other kind of experience to the table.
Yeah. Absolutely. So here, this is one of our kind of mood boards that we have in the office. So we like to be really physical with the way we express ideas. So we often kind of print stuff out that we're inspired by and put it up on kind of Post-its and put it around the office and try to really kind of fill the office with color and visual elements that cause us to be thinking about what we want to try and develop. So this one in particular is a level we're actually going to demo to you later in this talk. But here you can see references from, like there's Nicki Minaj in there, there's kind of ice cream and candy. And we're really trying to get this sense of something that it feels bright and colorful and sort of adventurous and pops at the same time. And it may even be that these ideas can gestate a little bit as time goes. And you might start developing something like this, but actually you still don't know what your final destination is. But simply being able to kind of walk around the office and have these reference boards means that you're always subconsciously thinking about it. And it helps spark ideas for the rest of the team as well.
Like it's funny, like I used to work on the Fable series of games for Microsoft, and you used to have boards around, but they were of like dragons and swords and stuff. And now we've got pictures of cupcakes and drag queens. It's a nice change.
So here's another example. This is like an area of the office that we refer to as the library, but really it's kind of a breakout space for anybody to kind of go and think about ideas and try to develop something a little bit further. One of the kind of key things about our office is it's completely open plan, and we really don't want to be sitting in front of screens all day long and just typing constantly, so we really encourage people to move around and explore the space and kind of get together as you need and have discussions about things. And just being surrounded by all of this color and all of this visual nicety means that we find inspiration all around us. And if you have a thought or an idea, then you just print it out and put it up, and somebody else might see it and it will spark something. And that really helps us develop our ideas. So this is a more specific example. It's one of the earlier levels in Monument Valley 2. And it's actually of a pre-release version, so you won't find this in the game. but it demonstrates when we were thinking about the architectural style for this level, we kind of collaborated, we took together all of these images, some of which were pictures, some of which were paintings. We even referred to our original Monument Valley 1 in this as well. But it really shows a sense of how we try to find that architectural style when we're looking for something new and fresh to do. And finally, here's one of our lead artists called Lauren. So she was the main artist, again, on the level that you'll see later this talk. And it's really demonstrating that you can kind of move these boards around. So one of the great things about these is they're all small enough and they're all light, so you can literally pick them up and like move them into the room or like move it to a meeting and chat about them. And Lauren here is just having it all around her desk so that she can be working on the visual style and refer to all of these boards as she needs as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about visual storytelling. So storytelling in video games very often is done through kind of cutscenes and dialogue and written text, and it's normally very, very explicit. Now, we want this to be a game for everybody. That's really one of our core principles. And part of that is to try to evoke storytelling, not just with explicitness that can be, I don't know, misinterpreted or difficult to get across, but actually through the mechanics themselves. We have this notion of platform perfectness, which basically means that when we create an idea on anything, we make sure that it's the perfect for that platform. And iPhones and touch devices, they're all about interactivity. So here, it's a later level in the game, which features a central tree in the middle in this kind of dark, open space. And the kid is on their own at this point. So it's kind of foreboding, and it's quite worrying. And you can kind of move these draggers up and down and bring shafts of light to open and close that shine on the tree. And the tree grows through this. And because the tree grows, it creates new platforms for you to walk on. So that's the puzzle element. But the growing itself is actually a very deliberate metaphor. At this point in the kid's journey, they themselves are on a journey of growth. And in this level in particular, by the end of it, you end up walking into the tree, and then the tree kind of sprouts at the end, and the kid transforms into an adult. And through kind of using the mechanics and the visuals together, we kind of tell this fairly explicit journey of growth through how you actually interact with the game.
Yeah, I should have said there's mild spoilers with the things that we're going to explain, but it's the best way for us to express what's going to happen in the game.
So these are like slightly subtler ideas of how we try to demonstrate storytelling and tone. So there's kind of two levels present here. Again, the one on the left you'll see a little bit later, and the one on the right is slightly later in the game. So this first one, this was actually from the mood board that you saw earlier in this talk. And hopefully you can see that once we take that mood board where we were trying to express those kind of feelings of popping, adventurousness, fun, and joy, when we created this level, we really tried to replicate that. And we've got all these kind of ice cream colors. The kid's on their own for the first time, so the kid is actually leading their own journey right now, so it's supposed to feel very adventurous. And we hope that what players feel, they don't even necessarily need to have kind of the explicit thought, but they feel that sense of adventure. Now, on the right, it's slightly later in the game. So this level takes place shortly after the mum and the kid actually get separated. And bringing the kind of grayscale down and having a kind of brutalist, fractured architecture is, again, a reflection of what the kid is supposed to be feeling at that point. And it's supposed to evoke a sense of kind of desolation and isolation in the player as well, in combination with the music that causes you to feel a certain way that, again, subconsciously, not even explicitly, makes you relate to the kid and understands how they feel at this point in their journey.
Like when you were talking about platform perfect, we think about what it would be like if we had to do, a huge 1 minute long cutscene or a big wall of text you had to keep clicking through to be able to express the story. And when you're creating things on mobile devices, which are these very kind of like temporary, ephemeral experiences, that would just turn so many people off the game. They just wouldn't be interested. So it's how we tell stories to people who don't think they want a story yet.
So this kind of final example of how we use visual design to express storytelling, this is a stage where the mother is by themselves. Now, the previous examples were all about the kind of external journey of moving through this world and what the character's feeling. This level is very specifically more about introspection and self-reflection. So as the level plays, you might have caught it in the trailer, but the camera actually zooms into the level. And when you walk through a door, the next area reveals itself by this kind of internal zooming. And really that, for us, is analogous of the mother looking inside herself to really understand what it means to have let her child go out into the world alone. And at the core of that, find peace with it in her own memories of her own childhood. And again, we play with both mechanics and visuals to try to express this to the players.
So yeah, now this is Adrienne's turn.
Yes.
Adrienne is really, really focused on making sure, the very creative people in there aren't only making it for themselves. I think it's really easy to see something that's really pretty and go, oh my God, that's amazing. But actually, what's more important than that, and I think one of my favorite signs in the studio is one that says, I think it says something to the effect of, player wow is more important than maker wow. So we need to remember that, when we use a test and when people play it, that's what counts the most.
Yeah. That's working? Cool. Yeah, so kind of touching on what both Matt and Dan have mentioned, we come out of a studio that's originally made digital products, so it's not games focused particularly, it actually works on apps for clients, that kind of thing. And kind of with what Matt was saying, with looking for inspiration outside of games, actually the way that we look at UX, so user experience, actually is very heavily influenced by the studio that we've come out of. So they primarily are looking at providing kind of services to people. If they're working with the bank, they want people to be able to use that app in a really intuitive and functional way. And when you're looking at games, a lot of the time that isn't necessarily the approach that you'll take, because if you want to make a traditional game, what you're going to look at more is challenge, and you want failure in order to see that success also exists. But something that Dan said earlier that I thought was quite accurate was you don't want someone to fail at using a banking app. So when we're looking at games, that's more the approach that we take. We're not necessarily looking for failure as a measure of whether or not a game is enjoyable. What we want is for people who don't necessarily play games normally, but actually know how to use a phone. We want those people particularly to be able to understand what we've put in front of them, and for them to have the access to that experience. And a key part of that really is the way that we use a test. So we tend to look at a wide range of people when we're user testing. So you can see here a kind of example of us, kind of the way that we all look at our work. So I mean, even in this pool, when we're testing on each other, we don't just give designers kind of the say on whether or not something is a good design. In this, you can see 6 people looking at that, and I think there's a mix of art, design, programming, all kind of assessing the design of a particular chunk. So when we take that to user testing, we've worked with people. We work with the wider Ustwo studio. There's a lot of expertise in user experience in there that's actually really valuable for us. People who don't necessarily play games but do understand the way that people interact with mobile devices. We'll test on friends and family who potentially have never played a game in their lives, because equally those are the kind of people that we want to put this game in front of, and for them to actually get that experience. We'll test with the canteen. The people that just work in our building, we'll just
strangers,
yeah,
just pull them off the street.
Completely random people, because ultimately when we make a game, that's what we want the game to be able to deliver. We want people to be able to say, oh, have you seen this? And put it in people's hands, and then they can actually, for the first time maybe, be like, oh wow, I didn't know a game could actually deliver that for me. But you can't assume any knowledge when you're going to do that, because as gamers, we can all sit there and someone can put a really complex system in front of us, and we're really curious to work that out, and we'll really enjoy playing it. But we're a very specific subsection of people that like doing that. And what I think brings a lot of us, particularly to want to work at Ustwo, is that we're trying to look outside of that group of people and say, well, how can we convince somebody who thinks that games are a waste of time that actually there's something really valuable to be kind of taken from that.
It's interesting as well how many times user testing settles arguments.
Yes.
So we could say, oh, Matt really likes this thing. I really like this thing. And Matt might think that my idea is too difficult, or people aren't going to enjoy it. We don't settle that by me saying, I'm your boss, Matt, so I get to decide what happens. It gets decided by the user testing. So we'll go and put it in front of 20 different people, and their feedback is what decides what gets made. We're really, really proud of the fact that I think it's 55% of everybody who downloaded Monument Valley 1 finishes the game. Which is an insanely good statistic, especially for mobile games, where I think usually that kind of percentage indicates the number of people who will never turn the game on a second time.
And I think it kind of links back as well to the way that we talk about story, in that in a lot of games, actually, the difficulty curve will be quite steep. And it actually means that potentially, if you can't master the skill that it's asking you to, you actually get the story withheld from you, which is a really interesting kind of problematic thing in a way. You wouldn't go to a film and then they ask you halfway through, do you get it? Because if not, you can't see the ending. That would be a really strange kind of way of approaching it. So we try and kind of keep that kind of balance between providing enough challenge that people do get a sense of achievement, but also we want them to see the end of the story. So this is an example of something that we changed quite late in the game. This is the level select from the game, and it's
4 weeks ago.
Yes, we changed it very late. But it's an example of something that actually it was really key for us to listen to user testing and to see maybe where we could actually not get trapped in our way of thinking and actually really understand what would make a better improvement for players. So the original version of this was quite flat. It was quite I don't know. It was very literal.
Let's be honest, it was a bit boring.
It was a little bit not good. And then a few weeks before shipping, we thought we have to change this, and it was really a sort of Hail Mary of looking at what's the main kind of things that we want to get across. And what we wanted was something really tactile, something that felt as fun to play with as the game itself. But in order to get from 0 really to the finished version that we saw in the game in about a week. There were so many layers of testing on that, and just seeing whether it felt good, seeing whether people could still understand the nature of the story, because as Dan mentioned and Matt mentioned, the characters get split at one point, and we have to kind of visually represent that in the level select. So yeah, I mean, we try and listen to our user testing as much as possible, and we try not to test with people explicitly who play a lot of games, because there's so many assumptions that as gamers we can make about things and how difficult they are, that actually when you transfer that to people that don't have the same kind of language of gameplay, it actually becomes really hard to understand.
Yeah, this is a really good example of how much we throw away as well.
Yeah.
Like, in a strange way, we're the least efficient game studio, because we throw away like 90% of everything that we make.
Yeah.
And even from like a project management perspective, you shouldn't really be changing things like this 4 weeks before launch. But we're glad of the thing that we got. Anyway, so we're going to move on to just a demonstration, which will run off my phone. Hopefully, I get no embarrassing notifications or anything whilst we're going to play through. So if we can just get the feed switched over to the phone. Great. So we join this experience maybe 30% of the way through the game. And as Matt explained on his slides, this is very much the first time the child gets to lead anything. So at the beginning of this stage now, the mother for the first time has taken the child and moved them in front of her. Usually the mother completely takes the lead. So the interaction is quite similar to Monument Valley 1 at this stage in the game. So we can tap to move the characters. Yeah, and the secondary character moves. But the difference this time, you'll notice, between Monument Valley 1 and Monument Valley 2 is that we can actually split these two characters up. So because the kid is still a kid, they can't go through the door without the mother. So we're just going to go back and get her. So again, every single screen we make needs to feel like its own little world. And this is the most candy-inspired level that we have. So yeah, everything needs to kind of operate on 3 levels. It needs to operate as almost like an audio-visual toy at its most basic form. It needs to just be fun to interact with. Unfortunately, we don't have the audio on here through the feed, but the soundscape, everything needs to be something that you just want to touch. It needs to feel tactile. And for a lot of kids, for example, a lot of kids enjoy the game because it's like that. It's like a toy. Then there's the kind of mid-level of player who understands the challenge of it. They understand that we're trying to get to these plinths and complete the monuments. And then there's also the third level of player who goes on the internet and hypothesizes about what the meaning of life within this game is, and they exchange stories and kind of memories from this. So part of the reason why I believe the game has been a mainstream success is that we design it for all those 3 types of people. We don't design it just for the top level of person who is there for the super intense story. It also just needs to function as a toy.
I think it's really interesting going back to what Adrienne was saying about user testing. It's amazing how nice it is you make a lot of assumptions when you're developing this kind of thing. And even though this is, we've made a lot of these levels and we've tried out a lot of stuff, but every time we do user testing, we're surprised by how people interact with it, and we're surprised by how people play with it. And it's really key for us to kind of put hubris to one side entirely and really understand that when people are trying to engage with it, we need to be reacting to how they want to engage with it. That's really how we get people who don't play computer games to enjoy an experience like this. And that's kind of our target audience.
Yeah, so the impossibility has still got to be a major part of this. So you can see, for anyone who isn't familiar with Monument Valley 1 and Monument Valley 2, so the core thing it was based around was impossible geometry, almost an MC Escher style impossibility to it. So you can see here that this isn't supposed to make any sense, yet it still makes sense. So the child still feels kind of OK because the mother is still here. The mother is still seen. So for now, the child is just enjoying its first kind of adventure without being supervised. But later on in the game, we split up both of these characters. They both need to go on their separate journey. And when I was talking about the growing relationship of the two characters, if you imagine when you were a kid, you probably followed your parent everywhere. You didn't want to leave their side. Then as you got older, you start to be more rebellious and you start to do things of your own accord. Then you get to be a teenager and your parent and the child probably needs to let each other go and the kid needs to move out or go to university or do anything that they need to do to be an independent person. And the same goes for the game. Later on in this, the child and the parent needs to come back together and they have more parity in their relationship. They understand each other as equals, not just as parent and child. And that's a really difficult thing to do in a game that lasts around 2 hours and the characters have no faces.
So this is an example of some of the maybe more explicit storytelling that we do try and put in there. I think, as Dan was saying, there's these kind of 3 levels of understanding that we kind of try and make sure that we satisfy with the game. And this one kind of speaks to maybe the higher level one, the one that's where people really want to try and interpret what's going on. We don't have any dialogue in the game at all. There's not really any kind of conversational text in there at all. But what we have are these kind of moments where they're more a chance to explicitly kind of reflect on what the story might be saying. Now, some people really aren't that interested in these, and they just skip straight through. And we try and make sure that that's an option for people. We don't want to force any kind of storytelling on people that they're not particularly interested to have. But what we hope with those kind of chunks is just that they give a chance to maybe suggest a bit more what's going on, and just give people like a jumping off point really to kind of reflect on what the gameplay might also be just saying to them.
Yeah, we say with the story elements of the game, we use a term called Trojan horsing the story. So what we mean by that is we suck all of you guys in with the visuals and the prettiness of what's here, and you think it's just going to be a puzzle game. But when the characters in this game make you feel something that you weren't expecting, it's really been the perfect game to kind of give to a family member or a friend who says they don't like video games. So many people have come away from Monument Valley 1 feeling that, I wasn't expecting to feel this way from an app, like something on my phone. I wasn't expecting to feel attached to this character or the totem in the first game. And in these kind of final parts of every level, the mother has to teach the child how to create sacred geometry. And we do this by manipulating the stars in the sky.
No pressure, making a good mandala on stage.
There we go. That was OK. That was OK. So each player gets to draw these at the end of each chapter, and they're unique to you as well. And you can share these out on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and everything. And this sacred geometry then descends down and powers up the monument that you've just finished.
So that's another example of something that we had to do a lot of user testing on, the way that you interact with that. It went from a really non-intuitive sort of basic form, which we just tested over and over again until we got an iteration that actually prompted people to interact with it. And now it's one of the most popular things about the game, which is just really exciting.
Yeah, hopefully we've got a couple of minutes. I'm not sure are we able to do questions? if we can. We'll see.
Yeah, it really speaks as well to this. Within the team, people are kind of coming up with ideas all of the time. And that mandala specifically allowed us, it was an idea that came very, very late, and we tested it out. And as soon as people started touching it, we got such a great reaction. We just knew that we had to have it in there. So again, about maybe a month or two before we finished, we decided to put it in.
Yeah, it's like an example of something that just went kind of to the next level. The end of Monument Valley 1, you get there, she takes the artifact out, and she puts it on a plinth. With every aspect of the game, we've tried to take it one step further. So with this sacred geometry, you actually get to draw it in the sky, and that's kind of cool. And with that, that's pretty much the end of us. So thanks a lot, guys. And if you do have questions, we're just going to be at the side of the stage and come and say hello. But apart from that, thank you so much for coming and seeing the first ever talk on Monument Valley 2.